Scions of the Southland. Today is September 6th, and we have a decent amount of news that's beside the football stuff this weekend. Jake, can you tell us about the new doubles rankings that just came out today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for the first time this academic athletic year, Georgia Tech is ranked number one in the country in something. Well, I guess until the U.S. News and World Report comes out for the IE program. But, anyways, in the meantime, that distinction goes to Carol Lee and Kate Sharabura, who are the country's number one doubles pairing. And they're followed closely behind, actually, by Ava Roster and Kylie Bilchev at number 9. So two teams in the top 10 is a great way to start out the year. We kind of unboxed why doubles being just 1 point when it is 3 courts that play is a little bit underpowered. But, if you can lock down that free point each time, you put yourself in a great place to win a bunch of singles matches or matches in general. And our singles aren't too far behind him with Carol Lee at number 16, Kylie Bilchev at number 73, Ava Roster at 118. And interestingly, I think for being part of the number one doubles pairing, Kate Sharabura isn't even on the list. So I would argue that, maybe once they start playing, we see even more improvement out of that, because that's a pretty great start. And, they return a lot of the team from last year. So there wasn't too much of a surprise there. But number one is definitely an awesome place to be headed into the season, which will start soon for the fall tournament.
Yeah, I wasn't. I mean, I didn't. This wasn't on my mind that this was coming. But I mean, imagine being a Tech team that has the target on your back immediately. I mean, we've talked about volleyball having that, and Kali has talked about that herself and a bunch of stuff. But no, this is out the gate for them. And with any success, I have to imagine Sarah Burrow will absolutely climb into the singles rankings, just because any success will breed more success, and the rankings should acknowledge that.
I mean, if we're talking about target on the back to start, golf, number 3 in the country by the Golf Channel poll, and number 4 in the Golf Week poll. These are the preseason polls as well. So lots of interesting, strong starts to the season. I don't know if we've seen the men's tennis rankings yet, but between golf, women's tennis, and volleyball, it's just littering the top 5 in 3 different sports. And that's not something that I think gets enough play, whether or not it's the season opening rankings.
Hence why it's leading this podcast. Golf is returning Forrester, Steelman, Howe, Lamprecht, and Reuter. So, I mean, that entire team is back.
I was going to say, it doesn't even count the kids who, maybe are the 5th, 6th option. And may not score every week either. So lots of depth waiting in the wings that we've seen in amateur action over the summer. So it should be really interesting to see.
In cross country world, Akshay, we ran at Barry. We talked about how they had a night run on a Friday night, which is a very unusual cross country start time. But what do we have happening here?
Night run for cross country, that is a choice. I don't really know what was going on with that scheduling choice, but it was fortuitous for Tech. Tech swept both the men's and the women's first place positions. They got 15 points, so they won the whole thing. The list of teams that I saw for this one did not feature anyone that I immediately recognized in terms of schools. I'd have to go back and check, and actually I probably can, because I have it
remember
open.
looking at last year's list and not recognizing any names either, or any of the team names either. So I wonder if we asked them if we could run there, just to be like, hey, we need reps. Do you care if we show up at all?
Not quite the usual circumstance as well, seeing Georgia Tech not just atop the list, but when you go to click on the recap button on their website, it shows up as you can't view a draft. So definitely an interesting all-around tournament. But anyways, I saw Morehouse on the list, some unattached. And then after that, you got Barry and a lot of question marks. So definitely not our normal competition, I think, is a political way to put that.
I would say that it looks like Tech is the only, I guess is Morehouse D2? Because if they are, then Tech is the only D1 program on either of these start lists. And
yeah, they're D2.
Being as it is, Tech placed 1 through 5 in both men's and women's. So I don't know if we need to spend too much more time on this one, because the field is not necessarily what we expected it to be, or at least maybe what you might have intuitively expected it to be. We'll be back at Barry later this season,
Yeah.
but North Alabama's up next in a couple weeks, so we'll cover that one when we get to it.
For the podcast that's all things tech sports, we make sure to acknowledge all things tech sports as they happen. And speaking of more things that happened, we had Tech volleyball finally got some games in O'Keefe this year. They had their home opener for the GT Invitational, I believe was the name of this set of games. We played Dayton, we played Arizona State, we played Florida International. Actually, you were there for this, Jake. I don't know if you were there for any of these either, but I'll let Akshay start because he was live tweeting these games. With Dayton, 3-0 sweep. It seemed pretty normal.
That one was interesting. If you go back, excuse me, if you go back and look at the plot that I posted on Twitter, which I now have to remind myself of, which is where, come on. I'm going to find it later. But if you go back and look at the plot, this game was pretty close in the first set, but not so much after that. I think we've seen a common theme with Tech this season where they just don't come out of the gate firing, and it takes some time to really get the engine room going. And I think I said as much on Twitter about that. One thing to note, though, and I also made this joke on Twitter, is that the crowd was in full midseason form, right? It was a packed house every single game. I think FIU had a little bit of attendance drop, but like, okay. I mean, you go from like 1,200 to 1,100. It doesn't change the amount of noise that crowd is projecting. It doesn't change any of the results on the board here. But just to make sure we get through all the games here, we talked about the Dayton one, pretty reasonable. Arizona State, I think, is pretty notable. Arizona State played Tech pretty tough in the second set and the third set. The third set they actually won, and they won in a pretty dominating fashion. I think almost holding Tech to single digits for a time there. And it was one of the worst sets that I think I'd seen Tech play in a long time, and even worse than the Ole Miss opening season set that we saw them play over there at Oxford. But I think part of the bit there is that it wasn't like Tech was making errors or misplaying passes. It wasn't like fundamental mechanical issues, right? It was balls were just bouncing in a specific direction that just so happened to benefit Arizona State, right?
Yeah.
And that immediately, like, I've never seen regression back to the mean happen so quickly than I have in that next set, because as soon as the set turns over, you have all of the balls bouncing Tech's way in set 4, and just Tech just sort of raffle stomped Arizona State in that fourth set to win. Almost held Arizona State to single digits in that last set, but Arizona or the Sun Devils. Go for it.
You want to ask about that game though? Like, momentum's a thing that gets talked about a lot, and whether it's real or not in sports. And I've always felt like in volleyball, that's where you can kind of feel it a lot, because you have the fact someone can get on a serving roll and just really feel like, okay, this is like they've got a couple points in them for sure, pending long rallies or something like that. Tennis kind of has a similar thing as well. I mean, did it feel like in that moment where Tech went from just not scoring to then doing nothing but scoring, like did it feel like Arizona State was on the back foot as much as you possibly could be in that kind of setting?
I think they were, but I think so I'm not I'll preface this with, I'm not necessarily a believer in momentum, but I do understand what you mean by when you're saying, okay, that serving, that keeping the consistent conserve is important. The way that I saw it is that Arizona State mechanically wasn't doing anything special, but where they were getting lucky on random chance, on balls falling in the exact place they wanted to put them, et cetera, not finding open patches of court, et cetera, in that third set. And then in the fourth set, it's not that Tech was doing anything different, but balls started bouncing their way. And on top of that, Arizona State started making mechanical mistakes, right? Passes weren't being completed. They weren't in the right position to receive balls. So I think more than momentum, it's just you like you got to get lucky on some of your positioning when you're dealing with a ball that bounces in the air, bounces in the air. And Arizona State went from being in the right places and putting the ball in the right places to not being in the right places and not putting the ball in the right place. So,
Yeah.
really
And
wild swinging statistically there.
yeah. So we got that set 1-3-1, and we played Florida International, won that 3-0. Not a huge deal there. Florida International kept it close, but it still was a pretty classic Tech game. Jake, did we shift in the rankings at all?
No, sir. Still in the top five, still number five, but I think we might be in for a little bit more potential movement coming up this weekend.
We definitely are. Julia Bergman was named ACC Player of the Week for the second straight week. At this point, I think we should start having MVP chants. I don't know if they give that award out. I'm forgetting, but Julia's in the running for number one volleyball player in the country right now, and there's no stopping her. But yes, this week we have two games at home. We have at number 10 BYU coming on Thursday. It is on the 8th. It is a 7 o'clock game. And then a 2-day hiatus. It's basically another like multi-team round robin sort of situation this weekend. I forgot this one's called I think this is the Georgia Tech Classic is what they're naming this one. You just got to find a way to name these things. But on Sunday we play Ohio State at 1 p.m. in a rematch of the Sweet 16 matchup that got the Jackets to the Elite Eight before they lost to Louisville. Also at this point, Bergman, most followed volleyball player on Instagram. Granted, she's got 3 different countries. She's basically roping in between Germany, Brazil, and the United States. So, yeah, got some advantages there in terms of social media. I did see the entire volleyball team in the same row in the section next to me at the football game, which we'll get into after our little break here.
And taking a short break before we move on to football, it is our weekly trip down the Section 103 lane, our podcast business. This week, our feature design is ATL apparel. That's because Saturday at Bobby Dodd Stadium is ATL day. So for that 7 p.m. kick under the lights, how better to celebrate than with an ATL shirt? And the only place to get it, for some reason, don't know why, but for some reason, is section103.com. It's very soft. It's very quality. I am almost always wearing a Section 103 shirt when we podcast and also whenever it comes out of the wash because I always want to be wearing Section 103. Great friends to the site. And today only, as this drops, well, I guess yesterday and today only, when this podcast drops, is 404 off all ATL apparel. So again, be in theme for this weekend's game. Again, that's 7 p.m. for ATL day and free shipping over $70 as per usual. That being said, you can also find them, like we said, not only at section103.com, but also at Section 103 on Twitter for more news about deals and new shirts and the interactive polls that they really do to engage all of us tech fans. So love working with them and feel free to give them a shout anytime.
Jake, we were at this said football game, and because of that, and Akshay was not, I will let him guide us through that conversation. I'll at least start by saying the game kind of went as we expected. I think we all agree on that front.
Jack, why don't you tell us about the score? Let's lead with the score before we dive into a conversation.
So the score was 41-10 Clemson at the end. What you can't see from that is that it was 0-0 until about 10 minutes with about 10 minutes left in the second quarter, which meant we did go a full 19 minutes and change without allowing a point, which at that point I was texting friends, I feel like we've already won, knowing that there was a lot of ways there was to still lose. But to get to that point, I felt was memorable, considering my last 2 games I had been to was at Notre Dame and versus Georgia, where at best I saw us attempt a 45-yard field goal that Jude Kelly had no shot to make. He made one yesterday. So he's got the leg. He's got more leg than he used to have. But yeah, no, score-wise, Clemson beat the spread. It was a 26.5-point spread, and they cleaned that up at the end.
I saw it as low as 21.5. I think the live line, or excuse me, the latest line, the closing line was 24.5, which I bet someone
24, I think, is what I saw at the end.
Some friend of ours, or some friend of the desert of ours, is probably sweating that one for a little bit. But let's. I think a good place to start, as I take over the hosting seat from Jack. Tell me something about the atmosphere there, because I was, like I said, I wasn't able to go. Jake and I had a conversation last year about how the first game of this series felt. Right. What was the marketing value, or what was the atmospheric value of having a home game that would have been at Bobby Dodd in an NFL stadium, for better or for worse? And I think we both came back from that saying, meh, if I remember correctly. Jake, let's go with you first. Has your opinion changed from that meh?
I think, if anything, my opinion has kind of gone down a little. Just because with the Clemson game, we kind of had the benefit or curse of comparing it to the Tennessee game, right? It's very similar circumstance. It's Monday, Labor Day, and Jack, I'm not sure if you were there, but I know Akshay and I were, and they literally put the student section. It was so full that they put the student section in the upper deck, and it was packed to the gills. Yeah. And this was just wildly different, right? I know there were some notes about the student section being weirdly shaped. It didn't take a full end zone. Yeah, maybe that Tennessee game was 50-50, but this was a 45,000 fans if they were lucky. I know they said 47 was the attendance, but I don't think they put a butt in every seat, if you know what I mean. But it just felt like a very different 50-50 in a way that wasn't quite the same. I think with the UNC, it felt a little bit more like a one-off, it was a Saturday, different, I guess, connotation. I don't know. And part of this is also me just projecting the fact that I had seemingly for no reason worse tickets than I did last year and was completely surrounded by Clemson people, even though in Bobby Dodd Stadium, there's a group of people that, it's when you sit there for every game, you realize the people that are around you, and the people that I purposefully choose to sit next to, i.e. the people that that are the 12 or 15 people in a row, coordinate to sit by each other. We're nowhere near each other. But then on top of that, I didn't even see any of our usual other suspects, if you know what I mean. So definitely a bit of a downer in that regard, especially just being, I guess essentially in enemy territory in the home stadium. But I don't know. I don't really know what I was expecting, but it just felt different, I think.
I was at the Tennessee game as well and the North Carolina game. So yeah, I've been to all three. And I guess this is the comparison game to Tennessee because those were both Chick-fil-A kickoff classic Labor Day games. Though I was in the middle of that 300 section at the time. And I remember was holy crap, this is and that was my first game as a student. So I was like, holy crap, this is incredible. We're getting all the stops. We got national television. We're the only game and everything. And darn was close to winning that if we had converted the 2-point conversion at the end of at overtime then. But the vibe was great, and the team was supposed to be half decent that year too. So I think that also was a big portion of why it was easy to fill that stadium up, and it was Tennessee. It's you'll fill up a stadium with Tennessee people, no problem. And then Bobby Tapp was good that year. I think I'm in the same boat though. This just didn't feel like a true Tech crowd. I mean, and also Clemson's not a boisterous crowd. Yeah, they've won a bunch of stuff, but they're one of the most overly nice fan bases if you go to a Clemson game in Clemson. They are, on average, they are very good people, and they're not going to be the kind, despite some videos I've seen of some weirdos fighting in the stands. They're not the kind of folks that are going to antagonize you either. They've had their piece, they've won their trophies, they know where they are. So in that sense, I think it was up to us to bring some energy, and we had nothing to really cheer for by the end to really do that.
It's one of the things that there was a lot of hay made about before the game is that the upper deck wasn't going to be available for seating. It wasn't going to be sold. It was completely closed off. The weird thing is that they didn't tarp it. You could see in photos and see on the broadcast that the Atlanta United tarps that are usually down when the stadium is in that configuration were not down. So you have a situation where you don't have that padding to reflect sound back down to the field. And so it just bounces back off of the ceiling and,
right.
It's a massive echo. And I know that one of you put in our shot sheet, it was 50-50 in terms of fans, but it was just quiet. Like the entire stadium was quiet. And I've never been, even during Falcons game, and the Falcons have terrible attendance. Let's be very clear. The
This
Falcons
was
have
louder than a
atrocious
Falcons game.
attendance.
This was louder than a Falcons game. That much I can say.
Okay, fair. But like that's my basis for it being quiet enough to hold a full conversation, right? Like and that's what one of y'all put in the shot sheet. It's just it's it continues to be frustrating to me that we're giving up conference games and putting them in an environment where they're set up for a certain level of failure, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of whether it's the opponent or the environment or or any sort of infrastructural reason, ticket pricing or date of the game or what have you. I think it it just sets us up for failure. I think one of the things that you said in talk comparing this to the Tennessee game comes to mind. It's like, oh man, this is awesome. We're the only game on today. And there's two ways you can say that, right? Oh, yes, we're the only game on today. All of the eyes are on us. And oh God, we're the only game on today. Everyone's eyes are on us. And
Mm-hmm.
the entire day and the entire weekend, the only thing that I could think of about this game was the latter.
One thing I do want to note is I'm pretty sure the tarps were not down last year because I think we had a whole bit on the podcast about that. But I could be
Right.
I could be misremembering.
No,
I
you're
don't
right.
know.
They weren't down. They weren't down. Yeah, they don't. If it's not, if it is not an Atlanta United game, they will not put those tarps down. Like
Okay, that makes sense.
They reserve that for the team.
The atmosphere, as always, the Benz is a great stadium, but it's just not home. And I think that's what the people I was walking out with were kind of at too, was just like, man, I just miss Bobby Dodd a little bit, you know?
Also, this wasn't mayhem at the Benz. This was a Chick-fil-A game. Like this wasn't even our like the thing we advertised last year of like it's a home game at Mercedes. Like this wasn't even that. Like we've done that once. We've had one home game at Mercedes really out of this whole
I,
3 games in 6 years at the Benz.
and yet this counts as a home game too, because like, you know, Clemson, we're going there next year. We're going there next year. And the thing that grinds my gears, get college football scheduled 10 years in advance, is the Tennessee game was the perfect encapsulation of what this could be for Georgia Tech. You are the only game on, right? All the eyes are on you on a Monday. You have this phenomenal stadium to play in, you know, a great venue. Because it objectively is. I like Bobby Dodd better, but Mercedes-Benz is a great stadium. And the third thing is you can use it for one-off not exhibition, but one-off like marquee events in a way that we play Clemson every year.
Yeah.
The Notre Dame game, even though we play them kind of often, made sense to go there because that was the original plan in 2020. If you're going to have a Mercedes-Benz game, you know, make it Monday every year. Make it an appointment. Georgia Tech owns this date kind of thing, and put Tennessee in there, put Auburn in there, put Alabama in there. I know that's a scary thought to think about. And, you know, because as the ACC is going to go towards this non-divisional movement, we're going to get teams more often. So those are going to be less, you know, oh my gosh, it's Florida State. We won't see them again for a decade. But, you know, even Vandy, you know, like just some classic Tech rival, or, you know, it's 2028 Mercedes-Benz mayhem against Cal in the 100th anniversary of the Rose Bowl of 1928. I know that's nerdy. I know Cal fans don't travel, but like put your marquee matchups in there and make it an event, because it has such potential to do that. In 2024, I know it's going to be Clemson again, but maybe they can make it happen in like 2031 when the schedule opens up.
Would you like to guess who the opponent for this exact same game is next year?
Isn't it Louisville?
Yeah, buddy. Guess who's one of Georgia Tech's protected rivals in the new ACC conference structure?
Maybe that's why Louisville wound up being our protected rival. Is because they're like, crap. We already told them they'd play Louisville in 2023. What have we done?
Let's talk about the game on the field. I want to start with the offensive performance for both teams. And I have the game on paper box score pulled up in our shot sheet. There's a lot of green on the Clemson side, but I'm not particularly convinced of the fact that Clemson runs a tight ship on the offensive side of the ball. Like I said, I didn't actually get the chance to watch the game. I followed this box score for most of the night. Clemson did not go above positive EPA per play until the like near the end of the third quarter, like when we are firmly talking about garbage time. Yards per play for them was 5.47. That's 20th percentile in 2021, or that would have been 20th percentile in 2021. EPA per dropback was 0.22, but that's been juiced by garbage time and Cade Klubnik coming in and all that stuff. DJ Uyunglele is not the guy. Like he's not the guy. That OL was not, from what I was reading online, that offensive line was getting pushed around in spots by Georgia Tech's defensive line. We'll talk about them in a bit. A lot of these Clemson stats are juiced by garbage time, and one of them that's not even juiced is yards per dropback, on which they only got 6.3 yards per dropback, 29th percentile in the nation in 2021. It was not a good offensive performance for Clemson, and I think we'll start there and then mosey on along. Jack, I think you said you had something on this.
Yeah, no, DJ was, it was weird just how easy it was to get pressure on him early. Like I was mentioning how we just didn't allow a point in that first 19 minutes. Like it was because we got back there. Like I mean, Sims was a pick on the first play, and then and then we have a 3-and-out immediately after that. Like effectively, it was a first down punt, all things considered, with how far Sims chucked it. But yeah, no, Uliagalek wasn't getting a good. He wasn't getting that many open guys for one, and when he did have some open guys, he was hitting them. But no, we had pressure. They couldn't run up the middle. Like we just had it on lockdown for a while there. And they just didn't have the creativity or the I just don't know what Dabo wanted to do necessarily in that moment. But yeah, they didn't have any momentum. I mean, not to try to insert it again, but yeah, there was nothing. They weren't showing any promise early at all. The first quarter was just two very rough goes at offense, and defense is able to kind of do whatever they wanted at the start.
And I don't want to say that Tech was any bit particularly better. All right, I see a lot of purple on this chart on the Tech half of it. Let's read some percentiles off from the top. EPA per play, first percentile at negative 0.25 EPA per play. Success rate, 35%. Fifth percentile. Yards per play, 3.6. Right, like it was not a good offensive performance on that side of the ball, but I think there are some takeaways there, right? Like there's, if you are looking for nuggets of hope, I think there were a couple, especially in some of the quick passing game that we saw from Jeff Sims. Right, he was able to get, like, sure, the yards per play is low, the yards per dropback is low, but but you have a offensive line that you know is going to be a work in progress. You have some receivers that you know are experienced and know you're going to be good, and you have a quarterback that likes to be on his feet. This is sort of what you have to do in order to make some sort of progress. And obviously, some of these stats, they are from garbage time when Tech was not able to do much of anything offensively, and Clemson decided to pretend that it was an NFL level defense again. But tell me a little bit about the offense for Georgia Tech and what you saw there, Jack.
I actually was decently pleased with Sims. I don't think he was necessarily like playing bad. I mean, I think that when Collins called a deep ball in the first play, like, all right, gutsy, let's try and catch Clemson early. Like, just let's see if we can catch them sleeping off the get go. No one was open that entire play. And he just threw a 50-50 ball and was on the wrong 50 on that. But I mean, he had a positive EPA when he was running. He had to scramble a lot. And he wasn't, and I think he did a good job recognizing where he could scramble, knowing when he had to as well. I mean, as we mentioned with Robert last week, like it's not like we have an outstanding receiver core. Like this is going to happen at times. And he also got unlucky with some drop balls with some guys. So I honestly have nothing really against Sims in this game. It's just like the supporting cast there with as a work in progress offensive line and not all of the greatest not a receiving core that's going to do the job really. And we try to work in the tight ends. We did. There were you could see the Chip Long effect pretty much the whole game of working in tight end stuff. There was also some screenplays that were decent. They were thrown in. My only takeaway on that is there were some linemen that just decided the play was over as soon as the ball left Sims's hand and did not play any blocking whatsoever and cost us many yards on that, possibly some scores. So definitely still stuff to clean up, but I'm not. I'm not going to say. I think we said this week Sims should be really good. I think he's going to have a fun time.
Yeah,
he's due.
Yeah, he's due for sure. I think we see a lot of our friends of the program, especially in the analytics community. They're like, we see something in Jeff Sims. Right. We see some of those underlying numbers maybe that we don't have access to, but maybe if you're on PFF or Sports Info Solutions, you see some of those underlying numbers that make you say, okay, I think he can be a thing. But stuff like there's some game management and procedural stuff that just burns your offense so hard that from some perspectives you might say like, well, just the way that you're playing offense is killing any momentum that the offense and Sims can get going, right? A bunch of false start penalties in this one, a bunch of illegal substitution penalties in this one. In year 4 of a head coach,
it don't matter who you have.
Absolutely. And in year 4 of a head coach, you just can't have those, right? Like that, and I understand that they turned over part of the staff, but you just can't do some of the disciplinary penalties here.
And that's the most avoidable thing too.
Yes. We had a whole bit on this in the 2021 offseason about getting the small things right. And I think at this point, I'm a little disappointed. A little is an understatement. I'm definitely disappointed in how that has turned out so far. The other thing that I was disappointed on before we move on to the defensive side of the ball, and I guess this is a good segue into the defensive side of the ball since this was on defense, is that this coaching staff completely forgot how to manage a play clock and a game clock at multiple points during this game. I was following along at times in the Moon Crew Discord, and people were very mad at the lack of timeout used to try to force Dabo into punting instead of faking a 4th down attempt right before half, and then just letting time run off the clock, and then not giving Tech a shot to go to the end zone at the end. So Tech goes into the half with all 3 first half timeouts, and then finds a way to burn all of their second half timeouts, I think by the beginning of the 4th quarter. There's a lot of stuff there, a lot of stuff packed into that just frustrates me greatly. But I think in terms of things that didn't frustrate me as much as that, I think the defense was actually a bright spot last night, despite giving up 41 points, I will say. Wouldn't you say, Jake?
Yeah, I would. I'm not the classic scheme dude, if you will, but in terms of, Georgia Tech just creating at least a little bit more havoc, it felt like we had 5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, and that's more than Clemson in terms of sacks, not in terms of tackles for loss, but only got out turnovered, forced by 1. So against a top 5 team, I think that's fine. I mean, it's not the best defense, but I think a lot of us, at least from what I could tell on the internet, from talking from the Rumble seat, casual friends who are not as plugged in, old staffers of various stripes, it seems like that was everybody's biggest takeaway is, hey, maybe Jeff Collins saying, hey, because that is what he said. He was like, you know what? I was doing too much CEOing of the team, not his exact words. I'm going to lock in and do more coaching. If this is him doing more coaching, I think it's working. It looked better, at least. The defensive line was pretty stout. And, considering a couple of those drives were in garbage time, and a couple of those drives started on what? I think the one after the fumble started on the 5 or the 10, something like that. Something very small. It's not like if you get rid of the outliers, I think the meat of the game, they played pretty well. Yeah, I mean, Clemson had some long drives, but for the most part, we've seen worse, and I can confidently say that because I saw 73-7 with my own eyes, and this was not 73-7. This game was closer than the score indicated, and it's easy to say, oh, we lost by 31, oh, we didn't cover, whatever. A big reason we were in the game at all was because the defense did make stops, and there was a couple times where DJ got lucky. That shovel pass, desperation on what would have otherwise been a sack, setting up, I think, fourth and really long in their own territory, turning into a first down. That's tough. And that's part of the randomness that defines a football game or any game, really. Just another, there's a weak targeting call in there too that was also on third down. I think that's not going to happen every game, especially the randomness of the scoop pass thing. And I think a couple of those plays that DJ had to make were because he was getting hands in his face or getting pressured. A desperation pop pass or the shovel pass, it means something that they were able to force that in the first place. And maybe I'm trying to be overly optimistic, but based on the amount of nodding I've seen from the two of you, I'm going to go with that. Somewhat agreeing with me, maybe.
So here's the way that I see it. I think it's a combination of what I was saying before about Clemson offense being extremely turbo garbage and some level of improvement from this defense as a whole, right? And we talked about this last week when we did our preview. This pass defense was literally last in the country in terms of EPA per dropback allowed. They allowed 0.45 EPA per dropback. Every time that a quarterback dropped back to pass, they added a half point to their overall total, right? If you cannot throw more effectively on a defense that has not changed structurally all that much, you're gonna have some problems, right? So that's part of it. And I think it's still a testament to the improvement in the offseason of that team to make up for some of those mistakes last year and be better, especially versus a team that has a definite talent advantage, right? I think there's much hay to be made about Clemson's positional talent, the wide receiver, quarterback, who's the guy who's got the dog in them, who doesn't. But the Georgia Tech defense did better than expected in this game. They did not get the doors absolutely blown off of them over the top. They kept a lot of things in front of them, and I think there's something to that, right? And I don't feel like I'm being generous. I think there is some nugget in there to build off of. Jack, you get the final word on this before we move on.
Yeah, got to start somewhere. And yeah, I mean, as Jake said, this is not 73-7. I was there for that too, and good lordy, was that. I mean, hey, they only played 2 quarterbacks against us this time instead of 4. So we're not getting as blown out as we used to in terms of how bad subs were playing. Like I won't beleaguer that anymore, but yeah, I think it's something to build off of. I think I'm really thankful we have Western Carolina now next week to be able to I think more fully practice. Not that you want to call that game of practice, but more fully try and execute some things that we didn't have last week. Do a lot. I think first and foremost, you have to clean up the dumb false start penalties. I mean, you're training that in Pee Wee. That's just basic football right there. Is don't jump off.
Only been saying that they're dumb penalties for 4 years, by the way.
Only 4 years. I mean, that stuff has to get cleaned up. There is no team that's going to win consistently and do that. So I think that's my biggest thing there. Is clean that up and see where you go from there. The talent's not a thing that's going to. The talent cannot jump as much as cleaning up pre-snap penalties can. That'll save us a lot of time. That'll save us a lot of yards. And hopefully that can turn into something that is maybe, if we don't beat Ole Miss, turns into something that's okay, we at least know we're going to play our best football and not shoot ourselves in the foot before we even start to play.
Yeah, and just to wrap up that Western Carolina game, that is next Saturday. That is the Georgia Tech home opener. at Bobby Dodd Stadium. That is a 7 p.m. I think it was 7 p.m. kick on ACC Network Extra. Also, probably your RSN. Important note: it is also at the same time as an Atlanta United game at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. That is a weird little quirk about the schedule. I would say both of those teams at playing their respective sports about the same quality.
Yes, yes. I will be at United instead this weekend, instead of Western Carolina for reasons, but also just keep note of that, like when you're going to the stadiums too. Like keep in
Oh,
mind,
it's going to
there's
be terrible.
there's two
Traffic.
sets of 40,000+ people going to stadiums a mile apart.
Yeah,
I'll be
traffic is going
at
to
the
be
Western
terrible.
Carolina game, so we'll be able to podcast with some modicum of competency next week. So you're welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
You're welcome, America. Speaking of America, let's move on to a smattering of ACC games along the eastern seaboard of the United States of America in our ACC blind rapid fire tasting menu. Let's start at the top on Friday, September 9th. Louisville goes to the Bounce House and plays UCF. Jake, you have the first pick.
Picking Louisville last week kind of blew up in my face, but I'm going to do it again because I'm a glutton for punishment. So give me the cards.
Glutton for punishment is right. Jack.
I am taking the old 2017 national champion Golden Knights here. Are they the Golden Knights or just the Knights?
I think that makes them mad. I think they're just the Knights now.
They're the Central Florida Golden Knights, as is canon. Central Florida here favored by 6.5. We'll skip the Tech game. Moving on to the nooner on ACC Network. It's weird that the Tech game is sorted before a nooner. Southern Miss goes to number 15, Miami. Miami's favored by 26. Jack, you're first.
It's Southern Miss. This is going to be easy for Miami. Also, it's sorted first because they're probably set as a favorite in your account.
Technology. It's dumb. Jake.
Give me the Canes.
Boo, no drama. Speaking of drama, noon on SEC Network. Number 23, Wake Forest plays Vanderbilt. Wake is favored by 13. Jake, you're up first.
I would say give me the Nerds, but that's both of them. I'll take Wake.
Jack?
Wake's got their quarterback back this week, correct? Or
yes, but don't read about the procedure that he had. It emotionally scarred me.
Horrifying. Yeah, not good.
If you're medically inclined to learn about some just operations that aren't the tastiest, that's what happened there. But yeah, I'm taking Wake.
It's that the operation was very anti-tasting menu. Speaking of things that are anti-good taste, noon on FS1, Duke versus Northwestern. Northwestern favored by 10. Jake, you're up first.
Give me the Cats. I don't believe in Duke until they play a team that hasn't been coached by Jeff Collins in the last 5 years.
Northwestern, not. We're gonna unpack that
Duke
later.
Played
Jack.
Temple. Duke blew out Temple. Temple bad. Northwestern beat Nebraska. Fluky. Probably also bad, but we'll
Rapid
find
fire,
out.
Jake. Rapid fire, Jack.
Taking Northwestern because the place is called Ryan Field, and we have a mutual friend named Ryan Field. So in his honor, go Cats.
Also, they don't cut the grass at that stadium.
Oh, I've been there for a game. It was the week after Paterno got ousted from Penn State, and Penn State came to Evanston. Sorry.
Rapid
Announce
fire.
the next game. Shut me up, please. Jeez.
Noon on ESPNU at Center Park Stadium, formerly known as Turner Field. North Carolina goes to play Georgia State. North Carolina favored by 7.5. Jake, you're up first.
Why is North Carolina playing 2 Sunbelt teams on the road?
Don't ask questions you don't want to know the answers to. Please answer rapid fire, though.
Give me the Heels. Wow. Busy day in Atlanta Saturday.
God, traffic is going to be so bad. Jack.
Tar Heel.
Take the train. Sorry.
Tar Heels. It is 12:30 ESPN 3. I assume that's also your RSN. Charleston Southern goes to number 18 NC State. There's no line on this one, so I assume, Jack, you are taking
the 18th ranked North Carolina State Wolfpack. Yes.
And Jake?
It would be hilarious if they lost, but give me NC State.
Pretty sure Charleston Southern was tied 10-10 with Bama at one point, but this is rapid fire. We're not going to go into that story. 3:30 ACC Network. Furman goes to number 5 Clemson. No line on this one either. Jake, you're up first.
Give me Clemson.
Jack.
Tigers.
3:30 ABC, possibly the best game of the weekend, at least in terms of ACC play. Number 24 Tennessee plays number 17 Pitt. Tennessee favored by 6.5. Jack, you're first.
Pitt had a fun game against West Virginia. They got the backyard brawl back. It was a good time in Tennessee. I mean, they always creep up into the top part of the rankings for a little bit, and then they lose something that's like, okay, clearly they're a fraud here. So they really need to win. But it's in Pitt. I'm going to stick with Pitt. I think they'll be all right, even though they are favored to lose by a touchdown.
Jake,
give me the Panthers. I think they're going to shake off a lot of the rust.
Over under on that one is 66. I'm very, very interested. 4 p.m. ESPNU. Virginia goes to Illinois. Mr. Big Ten correspondent, Illinois favored by 4.5. Do you like it? Do you not like it?
ILLINI. Illinois. I thought they were going to get to 2-0 last week. I think they'll get to 2-1 today or this week.
Jack,
I don't know if either of these teams are good. I have no.
They're not.
I would say if this was 2016, this would go to 5 overtimes and the game would last 6 hours. I'll just say Illinois because it's there.
7 p.m.
They're orange and blue.
CBS-SN.
That's all we can say about that game. They're both orange.
Speaking of literally orange and blue, Syracuse UConn, 7 p.m. CBS Sports Network at Pratt & Whitney Stadium in East Hartford. Syracuse favored by 22.5. Jake, you have first.
Yeah. Give me Qs. They looked kind of good last week.
They absolutely pasted Louisville 31-7 for context. Jack.
They did? Oh, okay. Yeah, the orange then.
Well, if you should have picked UConn, coward. Final game of the slate, 8 p.m. ACC Network, Boston College versus Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech favored by 3 points, so that's just the home field advantage. Jake, you have the final first pick.
Both these teams lost to teams
Rapid fire.
Them to lose to last week. Give me Virginia Tech. I think they bounced back better.
And Jack.
I thought Boston College would pull it off, but I guess did not. Djokovic still threw for 283. I'm going to still bank on Djokovic here and go with the Eagles.
All right, wrapping up rapid fire with Sicko's picks of the week. I will start. I want Duke to cover versus Northwestern. It's going to be a truly reductive day in football on Ryan Field on the tallest grass in America. Jake, what you got for me?
Not to spoil Jack's pick, but we all picked ACC games this week for some reason. I'm taking Syracuse at minus 22.5. Yes, I'm picking the Syracuse Orange to cover a 22.5 point spread on the road, and that's because they're playing in East Hartford, which isn't even stores. So, hopefully the ACC picks up one of those vaunted non-con wins this weekend.
And Jack.
I went for one of the Atlanta games, the Georgia State North Carolina game. North Carolina's only favored by 7.5, so that seemed a little low to me. I mean, I know they're not great, and GSU's probably going to have something to say, but I think that's still a reasonable game for UNC to win by 10.
I think we've all learned that UNC has no semblance of defense again, so that'll be fun for Georgia State at least. But that was rapid fire. That is it for us this weekend. We will catch up with you again next week. Mr. Grant, plug our stuff and take us home.
Thank you all for listening. As always, this has been Science of the Southland. You can find us at FTRS blog on Twitter, from the rumbleseat.com, where all of the articles that are associated with not just this here fine podcast, but the hosts, as well as all of our other staff. So go check it out. We cover everything at Tech, from volleyball to football, basketball to whatever else comes up. If you would like, you can email us at fromtherumbleseat@gmail.com. We do value your input. And we do really like to hear what you guys have to say. It really helps us guide not only what we talk about on the podcast, but also our mailbags and our general content. So let us know your thoughts, comment on articles on the website as well. If you ever want to find myself, I am at JakeGrant98 on Twitter, tweeting about urbanism stuff as well as Georgia Tech sports and the intersection of the two. And we've also got Jack at Jack Nicholas. Again, you can find our work at fromtherumbleseat@gmail.com. You can follow along Akshay's pet project, Game on Paper, for all of your advanced sports and stats needs for college football. And we would once again like to thank Section 103 for their partnership. You can find this wherever fine podcasts are sold. Have a great Tuesday night or Wednesday when you're hearing this. Good night and go Jackets.